Good morning, LifePoint Online. Thank you so much for joining us today, for spending this time investing in your spiritual life with us. As we begin our service today, I would ask that if you're brand new with us, this is the first time you've been with us, take the opportunity right now to take your smartphone out, type in lpguest.com into your web browser. I'll say that for you again, lpguest.com into your web browser. And I'll ask you to do that for two reasons. One, as there are message notes that are available when we get to that portion of our service so that you can follow along. You can also type your own notes into those message notes and email those to yourself, just as a reminder of maybe what God is speaking into your life today. The second reason for doing that is that there's a digital guest card that's available to you there. It'll take you less than a minute to fill that card out. I like to call it the kindness option, because at the bottom there are 5 different ministries that are listed there, a wide variety and array. You choose the ministry that's closest to you. We're already partnered with all 5, but the one you choose will make an additional $5 donation, just to give you the opportunity to do something good and kind by letting us know that you were joining with us today. So as we now get ready to begin the service, we're going to worship together. Our students are actually leading us in worship today as we sing about the victory that we have in the glory of God.
Well, again, good morning, church. We got the student band this morning, so we're going to need you to put your hands together. Sing loud and proud of Jesus this morning. Come on. Our praise awaits you with the dawn. Our souls awake to you and lift a song. We've seen the things that you have done, and still we know the best is yet to come. There's more to come. We sing this morning. Open the gates and let your glory come down. Open our hearts and let our worship pour out. Open the gates and let your glory come down. Open our hearts and let our worship pour out. Pour it out today. Your presence here is all we need. You break our chains with sounds of victory. Yeah. Raging everything. We lift this up. Open the gates and let your glory come down. Open our hearts and let our worship pour out. Open the gates and let your glory come down. We invite you here. Open our hearts and let our worship pour out. Come flood this space. No one else could take your place. Come have your way. No one else could take your place. We invite you here. Come flood this space. No one else could take your place. No, come have your way. No one else could take your place. So open the gates and let your glory come down. Open our hearts and let our worship pour out. Pour it out today. Open the gates and let your glory come down. Open our hearts and let our worship pour out. Pour out in this place. started singing this one just a week or two ago, so it's still a little newer, but we want to sing Joy of the House and the Lord this morning. Sophia's going to lead us in this next one. Come on, let's put our hands up.
The God who is, we worship the God who evermore will be. He opened the prison doors, he parted the raging sea. My God, he holds the victory. There's joy in the house of the Lord, there's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet when we shout out.
Back in 2011, Mark Shields approached me about serving in the kids ministry. He asked me to start leading a group of second to third grade boys. I felt like I was not equipped to be able to teach them and explain to them in ways that they needed to hear, because I didn't really grow up in a Christian house myself. Mark explained that the church would provide all of the resources that we needed, and really my only job was to focus on building relationships with the kids. And so I thought, okay, I can do that. So it wasn't too long after that is when I met Ben. He was part of my small group of boys. And Ben was great. He was very mature, especially for his age. And so I think it was maybe about a year and a half ago, I was in a meeting and something came up about Ben starting to serve on the worship team. I felt really proud of him that he was taking that step as an older student to serve our church and bless our church. Then a few weeks ago, had this just really cool moment. I was preaching on Sunday in Westerville, and Ben came to our church and was leading worship for us. It was incredible to think about God's faithfulness and my decision to say yes, and how He's used that to profoundly, shape my life personally, but also too that maybe that decision in some way has and will help continue to shape the next generation of servants like Ben, who was up there sharing a stage with me.
The mission of God, transcends just like what age you are. It's something that's relevant to people, to not just feel like, oh, you have to be an adult to start using your gifts or to start serving the Lord. It really does speak to God's faithfulness and His plan that, He would use Ryan to teach me, to invest in me, and then later on I'd have the opportunity to be, doing something alongside him, serving in ministry alongside of him. Pretty cool to see that looking back.
Well, once again, thanks for joining us. I'm so grateful that you got to see that connection between Ryan and serving, just one of those ordinary people that we're talking about in this series today as we wrap up, just as an ordinary person investing in kids. And he has this moment where he gets to connect with Ben, now serving. And, just that last song, there is this sense of joy, right, that comes out of the house of the Lord, which just lets me preview the next series that comes up as we begin next week, called Kingdom Values, where really we're looking at this idea of how the purposes of God help reveal the plan of God. And the plan of God only makes sense when we are living out God's purposes. And certainly one of those purposes that we've been talking about, our core value of personal ministry in this series, we've said it this way every week, that God uses ordinary people to accomplish His extraordinary purposes. And we've looked at people who are kind of supporting cast, right, in the Bible, not necessarily the lead characters, because it seems like that God has this unusual sense of joy and delight about using people who don't always demand the lead roles. And I know that sometimes when people come to our church, they walk around and they see a lot of people serving and a lot of people giving their energy, and they think, well, everything seems to be running smooth. But when you have this multiplication vision that we have, and we've been blessed to send out of our church over 500 people to start new campuses, congregations in other places. We're constantly needing to develop and equip and raise up new leaders, new people to serve. And so throughout this series, as we have kind of shown, these are the needs that we have, your talents, your gifts, your abilities, underneath the control, the authority of God's Spirit lived out in our church. What we're seeing is people take steps into serving, people asking questions about how, in the context of their life, God could use them in these ordinary spaces and places to accomplish and do incredible, extraordinary things, where you someday maybe are going to have some of these moments like Ryan and Ben had together, that we've been seeing those numbers every week come down as more and more people are stepping in to the joy of serving. And I hope and pray that you are prayerfully taking that step as well. Today, the last of the ordinary people, kind of these unusual characters that we are looking at, I'm super excited about it because I'm guessing that you probably have not recently heard a message about today's character, a lady named Rahab, who's a prostitute in the Old Testament. Her life is complicated. Her story that we have in Joshua chapters 2-6 is complicated as well. But throughout the scriptures, she is commended for her faith. So just a little bit of background as we jump in. You know, when the people of Israel came out of Egypt with Moses on the Exodus, they get to the promised land. And when they do, Moses sends in 12 spies into the land. Now, they come back with varied reports about this movement. This is God's covenant promise that he's laid out in front of them that they're going to take the promised land. 10 of the spies come back and they say, look, we saw giants in the land. We've got no chance. But 2 of the 12 spies, Joshua and Caleb, came back and they said, we saw giants in the land. They've got no chance. It's the same view, the same perspective, but completely different beliefs about that. One looked at the giants in comparison to their own size. Joshua and Caleb looked at the giants in comparison to the size of their Yahweh God and what he had done to bring them out of the Exodus. And I would say that's what we do as Christians by faith. By faith, we look at our circumstances in light of the size of our God, not our capacity to fix our circumstances and to make sense of them. However, the will of the people, it was to follow the 10 spies and not Joshua and Caleb. And so the people wander around in the wilderness for 40 years until a new generation grows up. And by the time you get to Joshua chapter 2, Moses is dead and gone. That generation is gone for the most part. And now Joshua is the new leader. God has brought them up to enter the promised land. So Joshua chooses to send 2 spies into the land, and they begin in the place of Jericho. Now, Jericho was a military fort. Now, you may be wondering, well, why did Moses send 12 spies and Joshua only sends 2 spies? There's no biblical reasoning for that, but I imagine Joshua said, we really only needed 2 last time, so I'm only sending 2 this time. And these 2 spies go in and they start at Jericho, which was mainly a military fort. It's a 6-acre plot of ground in that day, incredibly fortified. At its base, the walls were 5 feet thick. I'll show you a picture here of the archaeological excavation of some of these walls. Mainly military soldiers would have been in here. And so these 2 spies out of Israel would have come into the city or this complex, this fort at Jericho, because they would have received guests and travelers coming through to hear news, right? They wanted to know what was going on in surrounding areas and regions, and they certainly wanted to keep their eye on anyone coming into the city. So they come into the city. This is Joshua chapter 2, verse 2, and we'll read verses 2-4 to start out. And they being the spies, they went and came in to the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab and lodged there. And it was told to the king of Jericho, the commander really of those forces, behold, men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land. And then the king of Jericho sent to Rahab saying, bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land. But the woman, this is Rahab, but the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. So the 2 spies from Israel, these 2 unnamed spies at that time, they come in to Jericho, they make their way, I'm sure they ask around, they go to Rahab's house. Rahab, her house would have been kind of a combo, most likely, of a brothel and a hostel, where travelers could come and stay. It makes sense in the context of it also being a military fortification. So when word gets to the commander of the armed forces here at Fort Jericho, he finds out, listen, they've heard about the Yahweh God of the Hebrews. They've heard about the powerful things that God has. They've been worried about the Hebrews coming to the promised land. They've been worried about it for years. And so the king sends word to Rahab and he says, hey, those 2 guys that came to your house, send them to me. And here's how Rahab responds to the king / commander. And she said, true, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And when the gate was about to be closed at dark, the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof, to her roof in her home, and hid them with the stalks of flax that she had laid in order on on the roof. So the men come to Rahab, hey, give us these two guys. Rahab has hidden them in the roof lining of her house where the flax was overlaid on top of each other. She had hidden them up there. They come in looking for the two men, and she says, listen, the two men, you're right, they did show up here, but they actually left. They snuck out the gate right before we shut it. And if you go after them now, I mean, if you're fast enough, like you can catch them. Now there's a Hebrew word for what she did there. She lied. It's a lie in Hebrew. It's a lie in Greek. We have a word for it in Southern Ohio. We call it a lie. No matter what, it's bold-faced lying. And it gives us, it kind of brings us in the story of Rahab to this moral conundrum. So on the one hand, the Bible never says that Rahab was blessed because she lied. And at the same time, the Bible does commend Rahab for hiding the spies and for her faith. So the moral issue on the table is, well, number one, is it okay to lie? I mean, thou shalt not lie, right? It's one of the 10 commandments. Is it ever okay to lie? And if it is, when? When would it be okay to tell a lie? Here's what I think that the answer is. When the only two options are both sins, it's okay to lie. For Rahab, these are the things that she had out in front of her. Number one, she could turn the spies in, but she knows that if she turns the spies in, they'll be tortured for information and eventually killed, right? And she will be part of thwarting the plan and the purpose of God. And that would be a sin. The second sin would be to lie, to tell something that was false and untrue. So when the only two options that are available to you in a moral conflict in your mind and in your heart, when the only two options are both sins, what do? You choose the one that brings God the most glory. That's the only way that I can see this working out. And I will just point out that Rahab did not choose the option that was best for her. Rather, she chose the option to risk her own life, because if they go up into the roof lining and they find that she hid those two spies and she lies to the king, she will be publicly executed along with those two spies. So she didn't take the easy way out. Rather, she chose the option that brought God the most glory. So I want to be real clear. It is not okay to lie. I can confidently say to you that 99.9% of the time, you should not lie. There may be 0.1% of the time, if you're saving someone's physical life, that may be an option that's available to you. But why is it so important? Because throughout Scripture, the Bible supports the idea of integrity. I'll just give you one verse from Proverbs chapter 12, verse 22. It says this: lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who act faithfully are his delight. So we've got to reconcile integrity and faith. Why is that so important? Integrity is where we get our word for integer, right? The word for whole numbers. So God doesn't give us this command to not lie just because he doesn't want us to break a rule. Because the goal for us is to be whole people. And if you and I cannot tell the truth, if we cannot synchronize our heart and our words and our representation of ourselves, we're segmented people. We're only partial people in that sense. I was talking with Christy Lowe from our team, and some of you know that Christy is pursuing a counseling degree. And we were talking about this idea of being whole persons, whole people. And she just happened to mention, that really one of, if not the main goal of counseling is integrity, is personal integrity, where the things that we believe and the things that we represent are the things that verbally come out of our mouth. If you and I can't keep our commitments, how do we really know who we are? I think that's why Jesus says in the New Testament, let your yes be yes and your no be no. In this case, Rahab does the wrong thing, but she does the right thing. She chose the option that brought God the most glory. So the soldiers, they go out of the city, they go chasing the men. Then Rahab comes back into her home, and that night, That night, she talks with the spies in verse 12. She says this, "Now then, please swear to me by the Lord, as I have dealt kindly with you, you will also deal kindly with my father's house, and you will give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death." You know, it's interesting that it's human nature, it's your nature, it's my nature, to tend to marginalize certain groups of people. The folks that Angie and I have known throughout years and years of doing ministry, who have been involved in prostitution, God has spoken into their lives, saved them, redeemed them. What we have learned in friendship and in communication is that this tendency that we have to marginalize and isolate certain groups of people and develop, well, this must be how it's not reality at all. I would say prostitution was not first on Rahab's list of occupational goals for her life. She probably didn't grow up dreaming that this was going to be her life. Certainly we have found that to be true in people in our lives, people that we know, that we've had and have relationships with. What's interesting here is that what you see come out of Rahab is not what we tend to think about. Rahab has a family. She loves her father. She loves her mother, her brothers, and her sisters. And she goes to the spies, not in her own behalf, as much as she goes in her family's behalf. And she says, listen, I protected you. I risked my life for you. Now, what I'm asking is that you, when the day comes and when this battle goes down between you and Jericho, that me, my family, our home, that we would be protected in the same way that I have protected you. And here's the response of the spies in chapter 2, verse 18. "Behold, when we come into the land, you shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down." That's how they kind of escape the city. "And you shall gather into your house your father, your mother, your brothers, and all your father's household." In other words, they say, whenever we come into the land, you gather everybody into your house, put this scarlet thread in your window, and this scarlet thread will remind us, it will mark your home, and you and your home, you will be protected. And certainly, if you read through the rest of the narrative of Joshua, that's exactly what happens. Rahab makes an incredibly important decision. Rahab says, look, I'm choosing to align myself with you. Everybody else wants to kill you. They want to eliminate the threat, right? Get rid of the enemy. Everybody else wants to arm themselves against you. But instead of arming myself and my home against you, I'm choosing to align myself with you. Instead of aligning myself with our pagan gods and our pagan culture here in Jericho, I'm aligning myself with Yahweh God. I'm going against the flow of the culture to align myself with you, your values, your beliefs, and the purposes of Yahweh. And I would just say for us as Christians and us as believers, it's very, very important that Christians understand, as believers, we align ourselves with God. And at times we do that against the flow of the culture. We align ourselves with God's purposes instead of following the trends of culture. And it has been wisely said in Christian history that there will be a time as a believer, as a follower of Christ, when you find yourself by yourself. There'll be a moment where you will have to choose, am I going to follow the flow of culture or am I going to follow the purposes of God? And you'll be the one, you'll be the only one probably that has to make this determination and make this decision. You'll be the only one on your sports team. You'll be the only one in your friend group. You'll be the only one in your college class. You'll be the only one in your office. You'll be the only one in your family. And there will be some sort of cost or predicted cost in your mind to saying, I'm going to follow God and I'm going to follow his purposes regardless of what the culture and the trend is. And I believe that's going to probably become increasingly increasingly prevalent in a culture where people, Christians included, at times are more discipled by the media than they are by God's word. What we are going to hear more and more as well, how do you reconcile Christianity with my feelings about X, Y, or Z? When in reality, we should be saying, well, wait a minute, how can I reconcile my feelings with God's truth? Because we start with truth and then we reconcile everything else to that. And the beauty, I think, of Rahab is armed with the same amount of information that everybody, she didn't have a special amount of information, knowing what everyone else in Jericho knew. She said, I'm going to align myself with God's purposes instead of just following the trends. She's mentioned 3 times in the New Testament. We're going to look at 2 of those. And then the third one, we're going to pick back up in the Christmas series coming up here in a couple of months. We're going to look at 2 of those mentions of Rahab in the New Testament. And the first one comes to us in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 31 as we learn a couple of things from Rahab. By faith, Rahab the harlot perished, not with them that believed not. In other words, speaking of the people in Jericho, when she had received the spies with peace. Now, if you know much about Scripture, then you're going to know that Hebrews chapter 11 is sometimes called the Hall of Faith or the Faith Hall of Fame. And really, what it is this portion, this chapter in the book of Hebrews that reaches back into the Old Testament and it groups a list of the creme de la creme of the saints of the Old Testament, of people who lived by this extraordinary belief and faith in these unusual kinds of situations. And Rahab is listed in this group. And as you heard me read, it says, by faith, Rahab the harlot, when she received the spies with peace. Now, what's interesting about that is that Rahab's profession is listed. As a matter of fact, the 2 mentions in the New Testament that we're going to talk about, they refer to her as Rahab the harlot. And I think there's something inside of you and me that's kind of like, nobody else in Hebrews chapter 11. It doesn't say Abraham's profession. It doesn't say Isaac's profession. It doesn't say David's profession. It doesn't say Elijah's profession, but it says Rahab the harlot. And you're kind of like, come on, God, do you have to remind? We got it in the Old Testament. Do you have to keep reminding us? And the purpose of God's reminder in that, at least in my mind, is he's reminding us of his goodness and his grace. And he's reminding us that all of us ordinary people, and like I said a couple of weeks ago, there are things in my background, things in my past that I wish that I could go back and change. And I'm sure you feel the same way. I'm sure there are things in your life that you wish that you could go back and change. But the goodness of God in our lives is that he is not limited. He is not limited by our past. When Rahab says to those spies, please deal kindly with me. That word kindly is the Hebrew word hesed. Incredibly important word in the Old Testament. It represents God's covenant covering, his covenant covering of his people, and in the process of them moving out of the Exodus, moving into the promised land, this is all a movement towards the person of Christ, Jesus, the scarlet thread that's there throughout all the Old Testament, the one who was going to come, shed his blood, give his life for our sins. He's the thing that marks us. He's the red thread that marks our homes, and he's this reminder to us that it doesn't matter who you used to be, that God is more interested in who you can be, that God is the only one who can make your past your past. And I don't know if you are like me, but it's not like I say that to myself one time and I pray that one time and it just goes away. At random times in my life, at random times during my day, I'm walking around, I'm doing whatever I do. I'm standing in line at Walmart and I got this little voice behind my head that says, hey, do you remember yesterday when you yelled at your kids? Nice job, Mom. Nice job. You're a great dad. And I don't know if you have a voice, but I've got a voice. And I don't know when your voice speaks to you the most, but I'll tell you when my regret voice speaks to me the most is when I'm going to sleep at night, right? I'm gonna curl up, right, in bed. I'm gonna lay down. I'm gonna pull the blanket up, and I'm just about to go to sleep. Just about to nod off. And all of a sudden I get the, hey, wake up, wake up. You remember back in high school, whenever, you didn't say the words, but you laughed along with the joke to that person who was marginalized, and they've probably been that way their whole lives. You were a lousy kid. You were a lousy Christian in high school. And I'll wake up and I start thinking about that for a few minutes, and finally I'll start to settle down, a little bit again and get ready to nod off, and I'll get the, wait a minute, wake up. Remember, and I don't know, am I the only one whose regret voice sounds like the Aflac duck? Maybe I am. I don't know if it's just me, maybe it's you. But wait, you remember when you yelled at that soccer official and you embarrassed your wife and you embarrassed your kids? Those other people probably won't become Christians because of you. You're a lousy Christian. And we have this little inner voice of regret. And it feels to me like while it's not always there and it's not always speaking to me, that there are these moments where regret and what Rahab asks for, and I don't even know that she understood that she asked for it, but what she's really asking for in this scarlet thread that runs throughout the scriptures and points us to Christ, is that in him, when Jesus goes to the cross, what happens is that we get the hesed covering of God. So this little voice, right? What Jesus gives us is he just gives us a cover. Now, it doesn't mean the consequences of all your bad choices go away. And it doesn't mean you can't hear the voice. But what it does mean is that God has made himself eternally accountable for your past. Only God can make your past your past. Only God has the remedy that says to you, it's not about who you used to be, but it is about who you can be. That's the first thing, the first lesson that Rahab teaches us in the New Testament. The second one comes in James chapter 2, verse 25. James says this, and in the same way, was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out a different way? Now, the context of James chapter 2 is that he refers to justification by works. In other words, you are justified, you are made right by the things that you do. And you're going to say to me, wait a minute, I thought it was a justification by faith. I thought it was by grace alone, by faith alone, that we come into relationship with God. And you're absolutely right. However, there are two types of justification in the New Testament. That salvation justification by grace alone, through faith alone, that's Romans chapter 3, Romans chapter 4, that the only way that we come to Christ is not by our works, not what we accomplish and what we do. Rather, it was accomplished by Jesus in the finished work of the cross. That is a salvation justification. But James brings us a second justification. A justification not of salvation, but a justification of sanctification. So stick with me. It's going to get a little stickier. Sanctification is a big Bible word that just means to grow. And James says, like no other author does in the New Testament, that our salvation is proven, or it is justified by not just what we say, but by what we do. And so he uses Rahab as an example for us. Rahab proved her faith by what she did. So think about it like this. When you join a team, you join a sports team, for example, they give you a uniform. That is your inauguration. You've gone through the audition, the tryouts, whatever it is, and that is your inauguration into the team. That is like a salvation justification. You have entered, you have joined, the team has said to you, here's the uniform that you put on. Now, everything else that happens at practice and in games is that you are proving your worth and your value to the team based on the moment that you stepped onto the team, right? Salvation is like joining the team. And that only happens by the finished work of Christ on the cross. That is a salvation justification. But what we do from here on out becomes proof, it becomes confirmation of the salvation as we are justified by what we do. That's an up and down motion. That's a season back and forth motion as we go and move throughout our lives. This is a vast oversimplification. But think about it like this, right? A justification by grace alone, through faith alone, in salvation, that is getting you into heaven. A justification by works, proving your faith by what you do, that is getting heaven into you. You see the difference between the two? And James says that it is Rahab that teaches us, like no one else teaches us, that we are justified by faith in the way that we live and act and work. And you're going to say, but she's just so ordinary. This lady, she's got this past. One of my favorite pastors, he said it this way. He said, Abraham was on Medicare. Moses had a speech impediment. Jacob was a thief. Joseph was an ex-con. Rahab was a sex worker. David was a homicidal adulterer. Elijah was bipolar. John the Baptist ate bugs. Thomas doubted. Gideon panicked. Martha stressed out. Jonah was directionally challenged. Samson was relationally challenged. Zacchaeus was vertically challenged. Jeremiah was too young. Sarah was too old. Noah got drunk and Peter couldn't swim. These are the people through whom God changed the world. These are people, ordinary people, just like you and me, that prove what we have said throughout this series, that serving is how you grow. Now, it's not the only way that you grow, but it is a way that you grow. That you and I, taking on this mantra, this reality that we are servants. That God has invested his one and only son, his death on the cross, into our lives. The one who said, I came not to be served, but to serve and to give my life as we see his love in our lives as he served us. And so because of that, we choose then to serve others. And as we do that, like what you saw in Ryan and Ben's stories, that we get these moments of delight. Listen, for the rest of Ben's ministry, however long that lasts, for the rest of his ministry, Ryan has a part. Ryan has an investment. Ryan has a reward in the rest of Ben's ministry. Because 10 years ago, sitting there in Life Point Kids, looking at second grade boys who you wonder sometimes, are they listening? Are they hearing? Are they getting anything? And then a decade later, you have the joy of sharing in this serving opportunity with them. You know, when we step out of this life and into the next life, if you are a Christian, if you're a believer, there's a statement, there's a biblical statement that we talk about that we are all looking to hear. And it's not going to be seemingly the things that we tend to live for by default in this world. God is not going to look at you. He's not going to look at me when we see him face to face. And he's not going to look at us. He's not going to say, well done, good and faithful banker. Well done, good and faithful pastor. Well done, good and faithful engineer. Well done, good and faithful mom. Well done, good and faithful dad. Now, what you and I are looking to hear is those words, well done, good and faithful servant. Ordinary people, people with a past, people with hopes and dreams about their future. God uses ordinary people to accomplish his extraordinary purposes. Let's pray together. God, thank you so much for this series. Thank you for what you're doing in and through the lives of people who are taking steps to serve, to be a reflection of Jesus and the way that Jesus has served us so faithfully. Thank you for the example that we have in Rahab. Shrewd, intelligent, caring, smart, courageous. God, help us be those kinds of people as we look forward to the day when we hear those same words, God, from you. We look for it, long for it. We believe for it by faith. Give us wisdom, God. Help us not to always just align our hearts with cultural trends, but help us run to you first. It's in your mighty, powerful, incredible, wise, loving name that we pray. Amen. Well, as we wrap up the series today, I would just say a few things to you. Number one, you may not be serving anywhere. You may not be leveraging your life, hours, your talents, gifts, and abilities for the sake of the kingdom. If you would just reach out to us, shoot us an email, info@lifepointohio.com. We will do everything in our power to help you do that, to use your wiring to serve for the sake of the kingdom. Again, shoot us an email, info@lifepointohio.com. Help us know just a little bit about you, and we'll communicate, do everything we can to help you take the steps of serving. Maybe today you're not a Christian, and you would say, you know what, Dean, I want to align my life with the eternal purposes of God sending Christ to die for me. Remember at the beginning of the service today, I said you could go to lpguest.com. If you will go there, there's a button there that says Next Steps, and there's another button then you follow that says Today I Accepted Christ. We'll communicate with you. We've written a book for you called Your Next 30 Days. It'll help you to know where you go from here in this new relationship that you started with him. If you'd like to share a prayer request with us, you can do that there. If you'd like to take the opportunity to engage us in a conversation about your baptism, there's a button that you can push there to begin that conversation as well. For those of you who are regular attenders and members, we are always incredibly grateful for how you give financially. I want to introduce you to a couple, Tita and Denny. They are living in Peru, and their home was wrecked 5 years ago in Hurricane Maria. They still haven't had the resources, the opportunity to rebuild. So when we began to plant a new church in that region of Puerto Rico, and they met Pastor Carlos Roy, Pastor Roy reached out to the Send Network, that's the network that we are part of, and asked for a team of college students to come and rebuild Tita and Denny's home. And so I'll show you some pictures of that and that team. They did an incredible job in restoring hope and meeting needs, changing lives in the context of our group of churches. And so as you give here, I want you to know that you're giving not just to things here in our country, but in other places and spaces in our hemisphere and around the world to make a difference. And we are super grateful for your generosity. At lpguest.com, there's a button there that says online giving, and you can click on that particular button there if you would like to give your tithes and offerings today. So once again, I'll just remind you as we wrap up the series today, tonight is Trunktober, so 4:00 p.m., whatever campus it is that you attend, there'll be candy and there'll be kids and a lot of fun. You can invite family and friends to come with you tonight, 4:00 to Trunktober at whatever campus it is that you attend. And just to remind you that next week we start a brand new series called Kingdom Values. Super excited about that, and I hope you'll take the opportunity again to join us. God bless you. Have a great week.